Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Regan King and joined as always by my good friend and co-host Simon Barrett. Simon, we have an incredible conversation ahead of us this evening regarding a fascinating find in Israel, an archaeological find, an incredible discovery of 5 fortified cities around Jerusalem that have been dated directly to the time of King David. Now, some viewers may know that there has been among various intellectual circles dispute about the existence of King David, and there's been the attempt to discredit the biblical accounts of King David and his son Solomon, and there's been question as to whether this is all mythical. Even, I was telling you, Simon, on the Tower of David Museum website, it refers to the mythic character of King David. And so even in Israel, there have been individuals who value the land, who love the land, who have speculated whether or not David is just kind of Israel's version of King Arthur, so to speak. And someone's going to correct me and say he was real. But basically, they've discovered 5 cities that can be directly traced back to about 1,000 years before Christ.
Yep, or the 10th century BC. And what's so interesting about this find is there are 4 cities with fortifications that is literally a day or day and a half's walk from Jerusalem. And previously it was thought that this discovery was dated 300 years later, so couldn't have possibly been around the time of David, but thanks to the excellent research done by Professor Yosef Garfinkel, who's an archaeologist from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who we'll have a chance to interview later in the program, has actually then discovered that this actually dates to the time of David. And where the controversy surrounds is the fact that some archaeologists and some academics don't believe the biblical account. For example, they believe that King David, his kingdom was made of nomads with a small collection of small towns around the Jerusalem area. But what this proves is the biblical account that he did have a big and complex kingdom that was enough to provide for a big kingdom going back to the 10th century BC. So just a very, very exciting discovery. And this is when really the Bible comes alive through archaeology, and this is what makes this subject so fascinating and so interesting. And literally you can go in Israel and you can dig up a road or want to build a housing development site, and then you come across these incredible archaeological discoveries. And there was a story last December when I was in Jerusalem for the Christian Media Summit, and we were invited to see the highway to the Pool of Shalom. And this is not open to the public and won't be open to the public for another maybe 3 or 4 years. But what they said there is that this was discovered when there was a sewage leak. So the sewage leak had to be fixed, and they dug down into the ground and then found this incredible highway. So what is amazing is the fact that these archaeological sites have been discovered that really do bring the Bible to life in Israel. Now, that's just what makes this topic so exciting, particularly as we look at the biblical hero that was King David, a man after God's own heart, one of my favorite characters in the Old Testament, and a mighty warrior for God, as well as being an incredible musician.
Yeah, God's providence through sewage leaks seen there, that's incredible. And you're exactly right, Simon. Anytime you go to Israel, you see literally layer upon layer of history. And if you have the privilege of going to where there has been an archaeological dig or have been on one yourself, you can literally see the different layers of it in an amazing way. But this is just further evidence, further affirmation of the historical reliability, the historical veracity of the biblical record and account. We as Christians here at Revelation TV do believe in the historicity of the Holy Bible. We believe that it's worthwhile reading, that it's inerrant and infallible and a perfect guide. And it can only be that if it is historically accurate. If these characters it presents as true, who arguably are extremely significant for the the messianic line, because Jesus is said to be the fulfillment of a covenant God made with David, then this affirmation of it is very good. It's very significant for people to see and finally have to come to terms with in some cases, because some don't want to.
Absolutely.
The biblical record is real.
But also, it also points to the fact that we're seeing that Israel's legitimacy as a state is questioned, particularly by the likes of UNESCO, the United Nations Heritage Site, in their resolutions don't recognise the Jewish historical claim to Jerusalem, for example, despite all the amounting evidence of the first and the second temple. And of course, when we find archaeological discoveries, and this one report about these 4 major cities that were part of King David's kingdom, they weren't kind of discovered, they were discovered through going through archaeological records and books and reports to actually get the correct dating of these 4 sites just outside of Jerusalem that indicates David's kingdom. So effectively, they strengthened the Jewish hold and the Jewish claim to the land of Israel, and also proved the biblical account. And I think that's what makes them so important. So one of the things they've discovered is that they proved that that King David's biblical account of him being a ruler over a big kingdom strengthens, also provided through archaeological evidence, that King David existed, that the Bible account is true. And here we have one of the greatest characters in the Old Testament, King David.
His kingdom flourished around 1,000 years before Christ on earth. Second ruler of the United Kingdoms of Israel and Judah. There was no, you can't even call it the United Kingdom of Israel and Judah at that time, because there was only one kingdom, that was Israel. It previously functioned as a theocracy, meaning that it had various judges that God would give, various prophetic characters and forms of leadership, but there was no king. The law of God was the law and the rule by which the land operated. But in Deuteronomy, there's a passage that's quite prophetic and quite powerful, in which God presents to Moses that there will come a day when the people's hearts will grow hard, and they will look for a king to rule over them. And it gives some criteria for what those kings should look like, what those kings should be like in their character, that is. And we see initially the first king, Saul, is appointed, he is anointed particularly to be king, but he is selected by the people because really of his stature. People, they valued his appearance, they valued, he bore himself like a king. He was head and shoulders above the rest in the country, and that was literal. That was a physical description of him. He was taller than others, and so they thought, well, okay, we need a ruler who'll stand head and shoulders above the rest of us. And yet Saul's kingdom was a tragedy in how it eventually functioned. He rebelled against God on many occasions. This would eventually lead to, prior to Saul's downfall, David being anointed, and he would reign in great glory for a good period of time prior to his own sin, his own adultery, where we see family issues begin to creep in, and all sorts of problems happen. But the primary evidence that we see in the scriptures for David's tenure as king consists of several chapters in the books 1 and 2 Samuel in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Many of the Psalms are also Psalms of David. There's other passages that will refer to him. He is referred to in the Old Testament and throughout the prophets, as well as in the New Testament. Jesus is said to come from, and that's, again, a very significant part of the Messianic promise from the line of David. In Isaiah, there's the promise that to us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government shall be on his shoulder, his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. His kingdom, the increase of it, there shall be no end. The throne of his father David, to establish and uphold it from this time forth and forevermore. So the Messianic promise was rooted in a covenant that God made with David, that from his offspring would come one who would establish a forever kingdom.
Yeah, with the root of Jesse. And also we've got to acknowledge David's character as well. So he was a psalmist, he was a skilled poet, a harpist, and he was also a great warrior, as we see, for example, in his teenage years of confronting bears and lions with his bare hands. And of course, he came to fame as well by defeating Goliath. And everyone knows the story of David versus Goliath and against the Philistines, when the Goliath absolutely terrified the ancient Israelites to the extent that no one would dare challenge him until David and his wonderful quote that you defy the God of Israel and you bring famity to his name. And so David wanted to honor God and honor his name, and God gave him that strength with those 5 smooth stones to take out Goliath, which is incredible.
It absolutely is. And you can see to this day so many sites that relate directly to King David. And what's interesting, Simon, despite this scholastic and fairly recent history element where there's been skepticism as to whether or not David existed, throughout the land of Israel, you see the sites that are recorded in Scripture, and you see that there are people who genuinely have believed and continue to believe and uphold the veracity of the biblical account. Earlier this year, I had the privilege of going to David's cave there in Engedi. Incredible to think that this is the terrain in which David was hiding, and it's no surprise when you're there that he was able to so successfully evade Saul and his army that were pursuing him. The Judean wilderness and hillsides are filled with nooks and crannies and caves wherein anyone could lie in wait if they wanted to hide, to evade capture. Indeed, a lot of David's life was one of a fugitive. A lot of his the early days in which we see him following his anointing as a young shepherd boy was running from the jealous King Saul, who desired to kill him. He on a couple of occasions, one of my favorite stories is where he actually goes and he is with the Philistines. He actually is among the Philistines, and he feigns madness. He feigns mental disability, and they feel sorry for him, and he stays with them for a significant length of time prior to eventually his identity really being revealed.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now on this excellent CBN news report. It's entitled, Did David Solomon Exist? Dig refutes naysayers. And this is the historical evidence of King David's existence.
Here in Jerusalem, his name is everywhere. David is the most famous king in Israel's history, but some say he wasn't the great ruler described in the Bible. One Israeli archaeologist said that David and Solomon did not rule over a big territory. It was a small chiefdom, very poor.
This is a great chief. If you want to call King David chief or King Solomon a chief, this is a great chief, and this is a huge tribe.
Others say he never existed at all. Even a professor of biblical studies who insisted, I am not the only scholar who suspects that the figure of King David is about as historical as King Arthur.
These guys said, well, they didn't have any historical memories, so David and Solomon are pure mythological figures.
One by one, those archaeological memories are being uncovered,
And all over Israel, excavators are confirming the biblical story of Israel's greatest king. The Bible records David's story in great detail, from his days as a shepherd boy to his death in the royal palace of Jerusalem. Today, you can walk in the same places where David walked, and they still have the same names as they did 3,000 years ago. There's Bethlehem, the place where he was born, and where he was anointed the King of Israel at just 15 years old. This is En-Gedi, the desert oasis where David hid from King Saul in caves like this one. And Hebron, where he spent 7 years as the king of Judah. For centuries, the Bible was the only written evidence that King David ever existed. There was no archaeological record of his reign until about 150 years ago. In 1868, a stone tablet was discovered in Jordan. It was written by a Moabite king named Mesha, an enemy of Israel. The stone dates to around 840 BC, less than 200 years after David, and it contains the first known reference to the house of David outside the Bible.
In House of David, it means dynasty of David. So we know that there was a guy called David and he created a dynasty. Okay, so this is now absolutely clear that David is not a mythological figure.
The same phrase, House of David, turned up on another stone more than 100 years later, this time in northern Israel. It was written about 200 years after David's rule, again by one of Israel's enemies, Hazael, the king of Damascus.
He said, I killed 70 kings. I killed a king from Israel and a king from the house of David.
One of David's greatest victories took place here, in the Valley of Elah. This is where the young shepherd boy killed the giant Goliath. And it's one of the few places where you can still catch a glimpse of the Israel that David knew. Nearby are the ruins of the Philistine city of Gath, the hometown of Goliath, and the remains of the brook where David found the stone that killed him. High above the valley is a fortress that's thousands of years old. To the local Bedouin, this place is still known as Khirbet Daoud, or David's ruin. It's the only Iron Age city in Israel that's perfectly preserved and almost frozen in time.
For us as archaeologists, this is one of the richest sites in Israel. This is like a biblical Pompeii.
The Hebrew name is Khirbet Qeiyafa, or Fortress of Elah. Archaeologist Yosef Garfinkel first uncovered the city in 2007. He recovered some burnt olive pits from the site and sent them to Oxford University for carbon dating. The results surprised even Garfinkel himself.
Turned out that the dating of all these beautiful cities and all the find is from about 1020 to about 980 BC. And this is exactly the time of King David.
In David's day, the Valley of Elah served as a neutral zone between the Israelites and the Philistines. In Qeiyafa, which was right on the front lines, excavators discovered a large cache of weapons.
We are sharing some light on the story of David and Goliath, that we are in the same location, in the same time, and the city is heavily fortified. We have all these weapons. So it's telling you that this was indeed an area of conflicts between two political units.
In the Bible, this fortress is mentioned with a different name, Sha'araim, the city of two gates. In 1 Samuel 17, Sha'araim is the place where the Philistines fled after David killed Goliath.
Sha'araim means in Hebrew two gates. In Khirbet Qeiyafa we have two gates. So if you take the biblical tradition, the location, the chronology, the meaning of the name, all these three aspects, you have fits Qeiyafa perfectly.
Just 10 days after Qeiyafa was discovered, critics argued that it was a Philistine city, not a Jewish one. So Garfinkel went to work proving them wrong.
What is the ethnic component of the city? I think that the city is Judean based on 4 arguments.
His first argument is the city's design.
We have a casement city wall and houses abutting the casement city wall. This is now from 4 other sites, so now we have 5 sites. All these 5 cities are in Judah. None of them is in Philistia, so this is really typical Judean urban planning.
His second argument is the animal bones found in the city. All of them strictly kosher.
We have sheep, goat, cattle, but we have no pigs and no dogs. And in Philistine sites, they consume pigs and also dogs. Up to 20% of the animal bones in Philistine sites are pigs, but here nothing.
Point 3. This pottery shard, also known as an ostrakon. It's the earliest example of Hebrew writing ever unearthed.
It was not my mission to come here and to prove the historical authenticity of the biblical tradition. When I came here, I have no idea. And these are the results. These are the animal bones. This is the radiocarbon dating. This is the inscription. These are the fortifications. And then you have the biblical tradition. And what to do? They just happen to fit nicely to each other.
And it's a great honour that we will have joining us on tonight's Behind the Headlines, Professor Yosef Garfinkel, who is an archaeologist and he's with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Garfinkel, it's an absolute honour that we have the privilege of interviewing you today. You are currently on an archaeological dig right now. Your Skype connection isn't great, and this is why we're doing a telephone interview with you today. But can you just share with us some of the historical debate surrounding King David and whether King David was a real king and had a big kingdom?
Well, some people, about 40 years ago, some scholars started in Copenhagen, started to debate whether King David was a historical figure or mythological figure, because there was no clear archaeological data about David in various sites in Israel. All this picture has been changed since 2007 because I excavated a site called Khirbet Kayafa in the valley of Elah, and we discovered a fortified city in Judah from the time of David. In this city we have inscription, administration, fortifications, cultic building, and it's really completely changed our understanding of the 10th century BC, the time of David. The dating was achieved by about 30 olive pits, which were dated in the radiocarbon laboratory of Oxford University. And this is the base for our claims that this city is from the time of David.
And Yosef, can you just explain to our viewers how exciting this discovery that you've made that actually proves the biblical account of King David, that he had a big kingdom, the fact that you found 4 cities within a day or day and a half's walk of Jerusalem, and they're all connected to David's city in Jerusalem, indicates, doesn't it, from your evidence that David did have a very big kingdom, and it was a very complex kingdom?
Well, my research indicates that indeed we have archaeological evidence for the existence of a kingdom in Judah in the early 10th century BC. All the sites that I analyzed, 4 sites, all of them has the same system of fortifications, which we call Kazmat city walls, and we have houses abutting the Kazmat. You'll never find anything like this in Canaanite, Philistine, or site in the Kingdom of Israel. So it's very clearly typical Judean urban planning. These 4 sites are located on the borders of the kingdom and also where a main road crossing. Khirbet Kayafa is on the valley of Elah, Bet Shemesh on Nahal Sorek, Tel Natzbe on the main highway in the hill country, and then Khirbet Dwara from the northeast of the kingdom. So all these 4 sites together indicating the territory, the urban territory of the kingdom.
And Yosef, can you explain to us what it is like to actually have history in your hands and knowing that you are touching fragments and ornaments that date back to the time of King David in the 10th century BC?
In our site, we discovered thousands of artifacts. Each one of them can tell you a whole story. But I would like to concentrate on one object that I think is more important than all the others. And this object is now on 3 months exhibit in the Hermitage in Leningrad, believe it or not. It's not even called Leningrad anymore, it's in St. Petersburg. So this is a box made from stone and it's imitating a building. So it's a miniature building. And this building has similarity similarities to the description of Solomon Palace and Solomon Temple. So we know that this type of royal architecture, which described in the Bible in the 10th century BC, was indeed known in Judah in the 10th century BC.
And Yosef, what does this archaeological research that you've discovered that King David did have a very big and established kingdom, that he didn't rule over a few nomads, and actually proves the biblical account? What does this now mean in terms of archaeological research and how people view and look at the historical figure that was King David?
The main debate is how much history is embedded in the biblical text. And some scholars try to say that 0% is embedded when we talk about the 10th century BC. And as a matter of fact, we can see now that we have a lot of information, accurate information on the 10th century BC about David and also about Solomon. And that's why I'm in Lachish now, by the way, because in Lachish we are looking for the fortification of King Rehoboam, the grandson of David, the son of Solomon. The Bible indicates that he fortified 15 cities in Judah, including Lachish, and indeed in our excavations, we discovered a new city wall which was not known before, and we have now about 20 radiocarbon dating, indicating that it's in the later part of the 10th century BC. So I really think that in my research altogether, we fulfill the 10th century BC, the beginning with David, the middle of the 10th century with Solomon, and now the later part of the 10th century with Rehoboam fortifications.
So Yosef, we thank you so much for sparing the time to join us on Behind the Headlines today. Keep up the excellent work that you're doing, and it's such an exciting discovery to know that King David did have a large kingdom as foretold by the Old Testament. It's a real pleasure to hear from you today.
Thank you for your interest.
Really grateful to Professor Garfinkel there for his help, for his insight. It was great. It would have been nice to have him on Skype, but viewers, you may be interested, he was calling in directly from an archaeological dig, and we couldn't establish good enough connection to get video. So he's hard working in Lachish, actually, which is related to a completely different biblical story altogether.
Jeroboam.
Yeah, there we go. And Sennacherib taking over as well in the days of Hezekiah. It's just properly incredible. This is a great idea, Simon. I think it just gets the appetite and the inspirational juices flowing. Just fantastic to see history being brought alive through these great works of archaeology. Now, according to the Times of Israel, under the title "Web of Biblical Cities depicts King David as a major ruler," says Israeli archaeologist. We have our friend Professor Garfinkel, Hebrew University professor, claiming evidence around Jerusalem supports David as no mere shepherd chieftain, which is what some have tried to portray, that if he existed, he was just a shepherd's chieftain. There's a full network of fortified cities around Jerusalem dated to the time of King David, more than 200 years earlier than previously thought, offering support to the theory that King David ruled over a complex and large kingdom. Now, I would say it's not theory, it's fact. It's there in the biblical account. He established good relationships with so many different kingdoms across the board, and that only continued during the reign of his son Solomon.
Yep. So the paper, the academic paper published by Professor Yosef Garfinkel of the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem claims that he has found evidence of an urban settlement, organised cities dating to around 1000 BC during the reign of King David. His article was published on Monday in the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology, according to the Times of Israel. It was also a really good article in the Daily Mail as well. A peer-reviewed publication of the Hebrew University supports the theory that King David ruled over a well-developed kingdom, complete with roads connecting between cities, and this runs counter to the belief that some scholars of the minimalist school of thought who previously suggested, since there was scant evidence of cities during King David's reign, his position as a great ruler of a great kingdom, as written in the Bible, could be exaggerated. And one of the problems, I think, just coming to terms with and the process of this one. So in biblical times, what we saw is an archaeological site that sometimes has 4 or 5 different layers of history. So one kingdom or one empire takes over the Holy Land. They build upon the old existing structures. And again, so you have to almost go down 4 or 5 levels to actually then find the historical evidence that you want. In this case, the revealing of King David.
According to a press release published by Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem is pleased to announce the publication of a new research article entitled Early City Planning in the Kingdom of Judah. Kerbet Chayafa, Bet Shemesh 4, Tel en Nesba, Kerbet Ed Dawara, and Lachish 5 by Professor Yosef Garfinkel. The article appeared recently in the Institute publication, Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology. So viewers, please, if this fascinates you, and I hope it does, check that paper out. You'll be very well informed from it. In the comprehensive study in the paper, Professor Garfinkel examines the earliest fortified sites in the Kingdom of Judah during the 10th century BC. The research focuses on 5 key sites, those sites that we just named, which reveal significant insights into the urbanization process, urban planning, and borders of the earliest phase of the Kingdom of Judah in the days of David and his grandson Rehoboam. The Shephelah region, located southwest of Jerusalem, played a crucial role in the Kingdom of Judah's development due to its favorable ecological conditions for agriculture. It was called the land flowing with milk and honey for a reason. It was and is beginning to be, again, such a fruitful area and region. So this research highlights that the Shephelah's low rolling topography, the fertile soil, the ample precipitation made it the breadbasket of the kingdom in a region capable of supporting a large population, as the scriptures identify. The study then emphasizes the importance of the kingdom's expansion into the Shephelah and its agricultural resources as a key stage in its development. Now, what appears to be so significant in this discovery is that previous held position was that these cities were believed to be around the late 9th to 8th century BC, 200 to 300 years after David. But Professor Garfinkel's research has demonstrated very clearly that no, the cities here actually date back to 1,000 years before Christ, immediately to the time of King David. And so then the southern Shephelah expansion followed approximately 2 generations later in the time of Rehoboam. To the Times of Israel, Professor Garfinkel said, "What is a kingdom? You need cities and roads and military power and economic power and writing. If you take all these sites, they have the same urban concept. They're all sitting on the border of the kingdom and sitting where you have a main road leading to the kingdom," he said. "These cities aren't located in the middle of nowhere. It's a pattern of urbanism with the same urban concept." Truly fascinating stuff.
No, it is fascinating. And what we also learned from this discovery as well is that King David's ruled over 4 cities were between a half a day and a day's walk from Jerusalem. 3 things these cities have in common. 1, they were all fortified with a casemate city wall, and that's essentially 2 walls with a gap between the walls. 2, they are located on the kingdom border and located on the main road leading into the kingdom. So what's so interesting as well, so you literally have 4 major cities outside of Jerusalem, and we know from the biblical account that King David decided to establish Jerusalem as the capital of his kingdom. And even if you go to Jerusalem today, you can see the kingdom of David's city just opposite the Jewish quarter of the old city. And it's a fantastic place. You go in and there's a gold harp. So all of these 4 cities connected with Jerusalem, with major roads and everything else leading to them. So we know that this was a prosperous, we know that this was a big empire which backs the kind of biblical viewpoint, which is really important.
Now, all of these elements do highlight very, very clearly that these cities were not built haphazardly. They were not built in a nomadic sort of fashion, as has sometimes been portrayed by skeptics. David was no simple shepherd chieftain. He was a powerful ruler who was anointed by God over a kingdom that was rapidly expanding and that would grow in power in its network building with the other kingdoms around. Khirbet Khalifa on the Elah Valley protected the southwest border of the kingdom. Bet Shemesh on the Sorek Valley protected the western border of the kingdom. I've actually been very near Bet Shemesh and in some ruins nearby. This is the beauty, guys. You go to Israel, you can actually go to some of these sites. You can go on these sites. Some of them are closed off, but not all of them. They're just there. You can go to the Elah Valley where David slew Goliath, and you're there and you're reading the passage and you see how it interacts. It all affirms the biblical account. That's why I really encourage people to take a visit, if you can, to Israel. Tel Nasba near Ramallah protected the north, and Khirbet Ed Dawara protected the northeast border. Radiometric dating techniques confirm the fortified cities of Khirbet Khalifa and Bet Shemesh date to the first quarter of the 10th century, which is the time of David. The analysis of urban planning, geographical location of the sites then clearly indicate that we have a strong kingdom in this region that was able to build well-planned cities on its borders, protecting the main roads leading to the capital, Jerusalem. So if this is what we see, then why is it any surprise? Why should it be any surprise when the whole country is filled with, below the surface, of course, in many places, similar ruins and evidences that point to this time period of Scripture?
No, which is absolutely incredible. And having been on, well, not so much an archaeological dig, but certainly getting my hands dirty and shifting through the soil of Jerusalem, looking for pottery, and then looking at pottery that actually in your hands that dates to the 2nd century.
Was that the sifting site?
Yeah, the sifting site. And then to actually have in your hands pottery that dates back to the 2nd Temple period, the time of Yeshua, it's just absolutely amazing. And this is what brings the Bible alive. This is what gives Israel its historical legitimacy as well, and proves the authenticity of the Bible's accounts. I mean, if we can compare the historical manuscripts that are probably around at the same time of David, I don't know if many of them would actually survive, but the biblical accounts, the detail that the Bible tells us about the life of King David and his extraordinary life is incredible. And it really does indicate his character, his beliefs, how that he was able to unify the 12 tribes of Israel. And what he did is that he made not only Jerusalem the center of his kingdom, but he also brought the Ark of his covenant to give him that kind of religious authority. We know that in Israel and through the Old Testament, there's a big difference between the king and the high priests, and the king was never allowed to perform the duty of the high priest as well. And it was David's desire to build God a permanent dwelling place in Jerusalem. So let's have a look at this discovery in the city of David of the Pool of Shalom, and soon, within a few years, we'll actually see the highway in which the pilgrims would have got to Jerusalem, would have cleansed themselves in the Pool of Shalom, in ready for preparation to go up to the temple to worship God and to offer their sins on behalf of the nation during Yom Kippur.
Located at the bottom of the city of David is the Pool of Siloam, one of the most important places in ancient Jerusalem.
This is a site where all of the Jewish people would gather 3 times a year for Pentecost, Tabernacles, and Passover to immerse, spiritually cleanse themselves before the pilgrimage up to the temple.
These steps were uncovered in 2004, but when the pool is fully excavated on the other side of this wall, it will mark the first time in modern history when the Pool of Siloam has been fully excavated and open to the public.
So now there is a groundbreaking. We are really in historic times. Really, 2 weeks ago, we have received the okay to start digging. For many years, since 2004, when we discovered this site. And now, after 18 years later, we are finally able to excavate. Our tractors have started excavating the Pool of Siloam, meaning in a short, I hope, short year, 2 years, we'll be able to come here and see the full Pool of Siloam in its entirety.
This video shows what the pool might have looked like as Jews purified themselves and walked up to the temple. The Bible explains how King Hezekiah built the pool in Chronicles and 2 Kings. Now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah, all his might, and how he made a pool and a tunnel and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? The book of John describes how Jesus healed the blind man near the pool. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, "Go wash in the Pool of Siloam." So he went and washed and came back seeing. Weisman says the pool links the people of the Bible.
All of the biblical stories. You want to meet David and Solomon, Hezekiah, the kings, the stories of Isaiah, of Jeremiah, they're here.
Well, we're very thankful always for the very helpful resources that come out of our friends at CBN there. It's fantastic stuff. Now, Simon, despite ample evidence, biblically, and for me, the biblical text and its antiquity, that's proof enough of the Jewish connection to Jerusalem. But there are still skeptics and individuals, UNESCO, the Arab League, and of course, Islamic ideology is rooted against any Jewish connection. When I saw a tent recently saying, listed all of these Jewish prophets and said they were all Muslim, including Jesus. And I thought, this is...
Well, considering that they predate the time of Muhammad, it just proves that this is a complete falsehood and a distortion of history.
Completely made up.
And this is the danger that we're going in. And for those of you who have visited Judea and Samaria, then you know what I mean. I mean, here, when you go to the places, the hills of Judea, and you see, for example, the site of Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant rested, you can see that this was the valley that David defeated Goliath. This is where King Saul established his first kingdom. And it just makes the Bible come alive. And you can't take away that Jewish connection between the Holy Land and the modern state of Israel and the Bible. They are so interconnected. So the fact that we see, for example, the Obama administration back in December of 2017, trying to bring about a UN resolution that denies any Jewish connection to the land of Israel is absolutely ridiculous.
And this
dangerous as well.
beggars belief. It really does beggar belief. But in May 2017, as you say, UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations, what that stands for, its leading cultural body, passed the latest in a series of resolutions that denies Israeli claims to Jerusalem, in a move both forcefully condemned by Israel and touted as a diplomatic feat due to the growing number of countries that opposed it. The resolution indicates rejection of the Jewish state's sovereignty in any part of Jerusalem. Israel is referred to throughout the document as, quote, the occupying power, end quote, in Jerusalem, indicating that it has no legal or historical ties to any part of the city. The resolution also harshly criticizes the government for various construction projects in Jerusalem's Old City and at holy sites in Hebron, and calls for an end to Israel's blockade of Gaza without mentioning attacks from the Hamas-run Strip. In the moments after the vote passed, Israel's ambassador to UNESCO, Carmel Shema-Hoken, draped in a large Israeli flag, addressed the meeting, saying, "Even now, after this miserable vote, this blue and white flag is flying high above the Temple Mount and throughout Israel's eternal capital city, Jerusalem, waving in the wind, saying to all, 'Here we are, and we are here to stay.' This biased and blatantly deceitful decision and the attempts to dispute the connection between Israel and Jerusalem will not change the simple fact that this city is the historic and eternal capital of the Jewish people. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Dunnan, said in a statement following that Israel will not stand silently by in the face of this shameful resolution. A resolution, unlike previous resolutions, does not refer to the Temple Mount only as Haram al-Sharif or to the Western Wall Plaza only as Al-Barak Plaza, the respective sites' Muslim names. In fact, these sites are not mentioned at all. The resolution 201 affirms the importance of the old city of Jerusalem and its walls for the three monotheistic religions. It also notes the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron and Rachel's tomb near Bethlehem, both of which are in the West Bank, are of religious significance for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, though it calls them Palestinian sites. So what's fascinating about all of this, Simon, is that we have a very clear historical finds, very clear historical evidence of the Jewish connection to Jerusalem, of the Jewish connection to Israel as a whole, and yet there are repeated attempts to deny the historicity of that claim. And what I find so troubling is that the complaint of the archaeological digs on the in the old city of Jerusalem and holy sites like in Hebron. It seems like, well, what do you think is going to be found? Are you afraid that they're going to find yet more and more evidence?
Well, they will do. And let's see how the UNESCO responds to the fact when they find the Ark of the Covenant.
You shouldn't find things that exist. You shouldn't find the truth. We don't want truth.
No, right? but this is the danger. This is the kind of dangerous world that we're living in, where there is no longer any moral clarity, and that facts go out of the window because, our narrative doesn't fit with the narrative that we want to tell. So effectively, we're seeing through archaeological evidence the discovery that links the Jewish people to the land of Israel through the Bible's accounts of these historical figures like King David. We see in the Western Wall, for example, is the retaining wall of the Second Temple that was built after the destruction by the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and rebuilt. And so therefore there's archaeological evidence for the Second Temple. And so therefore, when you have a political decision on behalf of UNESCO, on behalf of the Obama administration back in 2017, the Arab League, not wanting to recognize any Jewish connection to Jerusalem, you know that this is the battle that's being fought over. And one way that you can discredit Israel, and this is what they're trying to do, is to discredit the historical accounts. But sadly, the evidence is so overwhelming that they can't dispute it. So what's the point of making up these lies by saying there is no connection, Jewish connection to their covenant city of Jerusalem, when clearly there is? And this is why I think also that it was US President Trump that pulled America out of UNESCO for this very reason. If you are an organisation where you are there to protect ancient historical sites and you want to rewrite history in a completely different narrative, then why should you get funding on behalf of the United States? Why should the British government fund UNESCO when they're clearly in the hands of these Islamist nations who want to rewrite history? I also have to understand that the Prophet Muhammad was born was alive around the AD is it 300 sort of time, AD 360, and prior to that, there was no Islam. So he's the one that united all the Arab tribes and united the Arab tribes behind his leadership and established a new religion called Islam. So prior to that, we had Judaism, we had Christianity, and that's why it's important with historical discoveries that they actually back up the Bible and they give truth that the rightful claim to the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people.
The finding that has been recorded in Professor Garfinkel's paper is far from the only window into the history of ancient Israel that we have.
I mean, the detail of this is extraordinary. So not only have we found 4 cities outside of Jerusalem that belonged to King David and his kingdom, but also the type of clothes that he would have wore as well. And the fact that King David is such an incredible figure in not only Jewish history, but also biblical history as well, is just extraordinary.
And going beyond David, we have, of course, King Solomon, his son, who arguably had an even more powerful kingdom than that of his father. David, was able to establish a lot of the foundations, but Solomon had throughout his reign a great deal of peace that his father David did not fully enjoy. Solomon was gifted particularly with wisdom, and accompanying that wisdom there was great wealth, there was a lot of great work that he accomplished, the architectural works, not the least of which was the temple that we see there. And even to this day, and this is where, Simon, I really find it, this alternate history that has, there's been this attempt to construct bizarre. I find it completely self-defeating and irrational, where there's a question as to any of this. I mean, you have right stood in the middle of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. And of course, this is where Herod's temple, but you track that back. Why was Herod's temple there? Well, Herod's temple was a slight amendation of, it was a full refurbishment of, I guess we could say, the temple that we see rebuilt in Haggai's day. So that temple, it was promised the Messiah would enter. The glory of this temple, the promise was, will be greater than that of the former. So it was a lot smaller, it was a lot less grandiose than Solomon's temple, but it was supposed to be even more magnificent. And then, and that was because Jesus would enter. The Messiah would be in that temple, and we see there the curtain is torn down. All of that, we could spend a whole program on that. But then that goes back. You think, well, why Haggai's temple? Why is that there? And you can talk about the evidence from the Hashmoneans and all that. It all looks back to their rooting in the history of Solomon's temple, which of course existed till the exile when it was destroyed. So there's a clear historical record, but the issue is we are in a society that's post-truth and that's filled with this idea that other belief systems, they for some reason must be more valid, and we just don't want to trust this as the manual. We don't want to trust the Bible as the guide to God's dealings with humanity. But again and again, we see God affirming His word through these archaeological findings,
which is amazing. I mean, if you consider, for example, the amount of detail covered in the Old Testament, particularly as it relates to kind of Bible prophecy and the vision that David had of the coming kingdoms, the Greek kingdom, the Roman Empire, and to have that insight and foresight that Daniel had, and the way that he was able to put that down into writing for future generations, kind of proves the accuracy of the Bible more than any other authoritative book. So not only is the Bible a spiritual book, but it's also, as we've shown through this program, also an historical guide to the past based on historical evidence of what happened at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Professor Garfinkel has done us a great service, yes, of course, in providing this interview, but in publishing this paper, which has gone throughout even mainstream press venues. I pray that this will get people thinking about the biblical account. Every time we see scholars, academics, skeptics, wanting to read their own personal, often anti-God narrative into history, it's so great to see how God providentially overrules and someone sticks a shovel in the sand somewhere, or like you mentioned earlier in regard to the Pool of Shanham, it allows for a sewage leak that leads to repair work that then discovers this amazing evidence that coincides with the biblical record.
Yeah, and that's what Israel's like. So that's what's so extraordinary. That even if we go for, I mean, I like World War II programs and discoveries, particularly when they find an old Spitfire or a Lancaster bomber in a German forest or somewhere, and they bring it to life, and that tells the account of what happened 80 years ago. But the fact is, they are finding materials that date back to 1,000 years before Christ or 10,000 years BC era is just absolutely extraordinary. And to say that all these biblical accounts, as recorded in the Bible, are then discovered through archaeological discoveries, which is extraordinary.
It's a blessing.
And also what makes the Dead Sea Skull so incredible, and if you go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem to see the skull written around and protected, and this is part of our Judeo-Christian heritage. This is about the heritage and the foundation of the West. So we know this is important for Israel, but it's also important for our culture and our society as part of our Judeo-Christian heritage.
Well, we are down to the final minute of the program. Thank you so much, Simon, for your research and work on this and for arranging that fantastic interview with Professor Garfinkel. We're thankful for you, our viewers, for tuning in to this program. Let me encourage you, maybe you're a skeptic, maybe you're an atheist. I know we do have a few atheist viewers out there. I want you to really consider the historical claims of Scripture and take a visit to the British Museum, go over to Israel, test out the history for yourself, test the claims of Scripture. I promise you, you won't find them wanting. And ask yourself, what does that mean in relation to Jesus? I pray that you've found this program useful and helpful. We've enjoyed certainly presenting it, but until next week, it's goodbye from Simon and me. We'll see you next week on Behind the Headlines. God bless.